That was yours? This one's mine? Okay. Hi. Thank you for being here. I'm Robert McBride of All Classical Portland. This is Carlos Kalmar, music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Hi. Good evening.
By the way, don't forget to hold this up here while we're talking, because sometimes you let it do this and then they can't hear you.
Nobody can hear me.
I meant to say that before we came on stage and I forgot, and so here I am. But
I will eat the mic.
there you go. Like the rockers do, you know. Yeah. Oh, and this is Chris Rogerson, who's one of the most amazing composers. His music is so beautiful and so right and so effective for this context. And I know that because I got to hear it last night. The most unusual concert last night with incredible variety in the music and yet with a kind of theme throughout. And a play that takes place right here with real actors and music written by this gentleman on the subject of immigration. And on other subjects too. I mean, I kept coming away last night thinking about man's inhumanity to man again and again, over and over and over. We just can't stop doing it to each other. And that is what leads to a great deal of immigration. And you'll see it in the story tonight. And by the way, the order of the program is not what it says in your printed program, because the play comes last after intermission, as it has to. As it has to. Okay, so I want to know, well, let's start with Carlos, because he's the man, he's the big boss. So this is the first of 3 special, unusual programs this year with a theme.
Yeah, well, we decided quite a while ago that it is important for a symphony orchestra to actually present to our audience something a tiny bit different, because I would say that in many cities, and especially here in Portland, Oregon, you're already used over many, many years to listen to amazing soloists playing with a fantastic orchestra. Actually very interesting programs. But it's kind of the normality. And sometimes these programs, and Robert and I many, many, many times were here on the stage talking about the programs have something like a thread or something in common or nothing in common, and that's the fun part. But we looked at this idea that started actually with Sound Sides last season, where we accompanied 3 very major pieces with visuals that were very different from each other. And at the same time, we said to ourselves, we cannot just say, okay, this is what we present one year, and this is it. And next year it will be, let's go back to what we call concert normality. We actually conceived this as a multi-year project, knowing that actually we do not want to repeat ourselves. So this year we took a different approach in the sense of, first of all, there's only one concert where the visuals are in any way comparable to what you saw last year. Vaguely, that's it. And number 2, we also took a step, I would say 3 steps further, and said, what about themes that are important to society in our day and age? And we came up with 3 themes that we as an institution, and Charles Kalmar, our wonderful artistic administrator, and myself think these themes are there anyway, meaning the theme of immigration, let's just talk about tonight. It's immigration, it's environment, it's homelessness. Immigration has been in humanity, has accompanied humanity for centuries, especially 20th and 21st century, and it will not end just because we do a concert, unfortunately. So we decided to do that, And we also decided to do it in a different way, because you'll see that on one side in the program that you're going to hear tonight, you have 4 composers, and only one of them, this gentleman, is not an immigrant. Then you have a writer who wrote a playlet who is an immigrant. You have a soloist, Kirill, who is an immigrant. You have a music director who is an immigrant. Several musicians on stage are an immigrant. I bet many of you are immigrants or second generation, whatever. Immigration is everywhere. So that is and was our thinking. And the fact that actually immigration as a topic is now, over the last 9 months or 10 months or something like that, in everybody's head, just came after we decided to do this. Because we didn't think like, hey, this will be a hot topic in a year from now, and we just know it. No, we didn't. And sometimes things come together very nicely, but just be in a way aware that this, the fact that we tackle immigration has nothing to do with the country we live in per se. And it's actually something that we look at it from a very global perspective. Yesterday I was, after the dress rehearsal, in the morning I was talking to Deepika, who wrote the lyrics, and said, you know, the great thing is, yes, her play takes place in America, but if you substitute the word America for Great Britain, it works equally well. So it's actually international. And in that sense, there is no question that Chris's music works that way too. I mean, either you tell me now that I'm missing some American tunes in the score that I didn't see, no. Or it's just music.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about your process in this from the commission. What did they ask you to do, to your back and forth with Deepika, some of it via Skype, because you live in New York and she lives in LA, and how's the music going to be there, and what's it going to do, and take it away.
Sure. So first, I'll say I'm so thrilled to be back here, and thank you for having me. But it was a really exciting project to take on, and Deepika and I worked. I actually had never met Deepika until yesterday. That's true. I had only talked to her on the phone. So we had long phone conversations about the play itself, then the music's role in the play, and it was interesting how Deepika, first of all, was wonderful to work with, and she was very open to any ideas I had, and vice versa. And so there was a lot of small tinkering on both sides, where she might say, oh, like, you know, maybe make this tiny adjustment, or I might say that to her. And it was very, it was such a smooth process. I said to Elena, the director of the play, yesterday, it was almost too smooth. So we needed to like fight before we left each other. But but it was, I mean, it was a matter of, so what you'll hear tonight, the actors speak over the music, and timing that was a challenge. And so one of the things Deepika and I did on the phone for several hours was read the play together, and I would be playing the music at the piano to make sure it lined up. Now, of course, it's completely different when you have like great musicians playing, a lot of them playing in the orchestra, and me, my terrible like piano playing. But it helped kind of set where the actors are supposed to come in. So that was a lot of the work in terms of coordinating the music and the text.
Deepika said, she did this with Carlos last night, et moi, and she said that the first words she wrote for this play were the first words in the play. Was that true of the music? Do you remember? This started in April, right?
Well, I couldn't give you an exact date on that. I don't know when. It was earlier than that. I didn't start on the music until much later, but I knew that this was happening before then. But yeah, I wouldn't. I don't. I kind of, when I got the play, I kind of just thought of this. So there are. You'll hear. This isn't giving anything away. That there are 5 sections in the play that have music. And so when I got the play and I determined where the music should be, I just kind of like tried to think of all of them, like the main little kernels of the ideas at once. So I couldn't tell you exactly which one was first. I don't think it was like that, where like the very first words were, yeah.
Carlos, when did you get the music?
Fairly, I don't know, fairly normal time.
Last minute.
No, it's not
It's a
last
very
minute.
diplomatic answer.
I think it's usually it's something like 2-3 months out.
You worked with a rehearsal pianist at first.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the great thing is that Chris was already here, so he did most of the rehearsals with the piano, and I just came and mainly I just listened. Because all I just listened, because what I didn't know is, yes, you read the line, you have the music, but you don't know how the actors are going to time it and how the actors are going to go after the drama that is there, or how that works. And then just listening to all these wonderful guys, I had an idea. The great thing about the score together with the plays, whenever you have music and actors talking over the music, there is this issue of balance, which is we as an orchestra can be really loud, and then you are not going to hear a word of what is being spoken. And the great thing is that aside from maybe the first 40 seconds of the music, I knew just by reading it that there is no issue. Nothing. I think like, fine. I mean, yes, has its difficulties and its tricks, but in terms of how to balance and how to hear the voices, it's fine. The beginning was a tiny bit of a challenge, and we fiddled around in rehearsal with that. Until we got, in 10 minutes, we just said, yeah, this is how it is, end of story.
Do either of you have any experience as writers or actors?
Definitely not for me.
I'm acting all the time.
Keep working on that, okay? Because I don't, and I spend a lot of time hanging around musicians. Duh, here I am, and I work at a radio station that plays classical music all the time. We have people coming in and we interview them, but I don't very often find myself around actors. And frankly, I'm a little bit uncomfortable when I am around them. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's partly because I'm kind of in awe of what they do. And if you're an actor, especially if you're a professional, you get to live multiple lives. I just think that's so incredible.
I actually think that's exactly what you do as a musician too. The point is that when we play music, and I don't think you are uneasy, intimidated, or yes, you are in awe. All the musicians you meet, it's the same thing.
This guy's one of them. Believe me, his music tonight is just.
And the point is that I believe very firmly that music is a language, and the best example for it is actually tonight. You have 4 pieces, and they are so vastly different from each other, and every piece of music has its own way of expressing itself, but it's kind of understandable. And I mean, when I see actors, of course I'm in awe, because it's something that it's an art form, and they can crawl into a different character and do that with words, whereas people like me crawl into somebody else's skin, if that can even be remotely possible, Mahler's, Beethoven's, etc. But essentially it's a language that is not so specific. I mean, if you say something with words and you don't say it correctly, everybody will look at you like, huh? And if you do something with music, sometimes the music is so good that you cannot mess it up.
I hope you will take the time to read the program notes that you have in your program book, or at least the bios, like Dybbeke, the playwright's bio. You know, it's just, who is this person who I had never heard of until these concerts, but she's really remarkable. And she talked about something I found really interesting last night that has to do with your role and hers in the creation of this play. The title, Azan, refers to the Muslim call to prayer, by the way, that's what that means. So she talked about the direct communication in the words, the meaning of the words, and the more indirect communication in the music. Music is often said to be the most abstract art form. And yet, is there anything less abstract than emotion? I mean, in the human experience, that's it. So what goes on in a composer's mind about that kind of thing?
Well, I think that the challenge when, I find this a challenge when working with text is there's something called text painting in music where you're just directly representing what's on the page with music. So if like somebody says there's a loud crack, then maybe you have the whip in the music or some, snare drum or something, something that makes a cracking noise. But that's not always best overall. And so when to deploy those moments where you're being more direct in evoking what the text has to offer, and then, or what the text is trying to emote, or is emoting, and then when you kind of pull back and let the text let the text shine on its own.
There are other really obvious things that a composer could do, like major key for happy and minor
Right.
key for sad, and
Right.
a diminished chord for something really horrible.
Right.
But
yeah.
I didn't have that reaction to anything that you wrote. There's nothing cliche in there. It's
Thank
just
you.
really beautiful. And as I said to you last night, the way you write for strings, wow,
Right.
did that make you want to go back to playing the violin, the stuff you wrote?
It made me be very grateful that I'm a conductor.
There is some very high string writing.
very
They're doing
high.
an amazing job. But yeah,
So are you a string player?
I used to play cello. I say, yeah. I mean, I'm not.
Aha, so all those cello solos.
That's why you'll see there are two big cello solos in this piece, and she's amazing. So.
Nancy Ives, she plays them beautifully. So we should talk about the two very, very different and yet related pieces for piano and orchestra on the program. Schoenberg's Piano Concerto and Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin. Okay, so really different, right? But, these guys knew each other. They both lived in LA and they played tennis together. And Schoenberg was an immigrant, came here escaping the Nazi nonsense going on in Europe. And Gershwin was a Jewish kid from the Lower East Side. His parents were immigrants to America as well. So they had more in common than we might think on the surface. And we have the most wonderful pianist here doing such magnificent work in both of these pieces. The Schoenberg will be difficult in a way to listen to. It's not familiar music, and it's atonal. But it has some of the typical piano concerto things like octaves in the hands, and it has fast music and slow music and a lot of variety, even hints at a waltz. It's very Viennese, as you were saying last night.
Well, the funny thing is that the Schoenberg, yes, it's a little bit tricky to understand. It's one of those pieces where my recommendation is please listen to it twice. because it's actually so interesting. And once again, I have to say that concerti like this absolutely need not only a very intelligent player, like Kirill is, but also somebody who is incredibly musical, because you have to understand what you see on the page. I give you a little bit of insight in how a Schoenberg score actually looks, because he works in a technique that he himself invented. It's not like Beethoven or like Brahms and all the others that we all adore. He's different. So there are letters in the score, meaning this is the principal melody and this is the secondary melody, and then everything else, and everything happens at once. And the principal melodies they are actually, in part, very lyrical, highly expressive, and have something of this Viennese tone, sometimes also the tone of late Romanticism. So why on earth does Schoenberg sound like he sounds? It's because of this 12-tone technique that is, it's a very democratic technique, I would say. And the fact that he writes sometimes extremely complex textures. And it gets a little tricky to really know the what's what if you don't read the score, if you just listen to it. But the great thing is, if you look at this piece and you listen to this piece and think, I know it's atonal, I know it utilizes a language I'm not familiar, and I know it's very modern, but somebody is telling me, look at it as if it would be a piece by Brahms, and approach it that way, because it has this longing melodies. And then it has something, Robert said it very correctly, it has something very Viennese, which means a certain dance element and sometimes true sarcasm and irony. It's just that the language of all of that is a little bit different from what you usually know. But the concert is absolutely stunning. And you have to have, I say it again, a pianist like Kirill who knows all these idioms. Kirill is actually a living proof of one, if not the message we want to say to everybody who actually comes to these concerts. Because you have a Russian, he's Russian. He emigrated, he studied in part in the United States. He lives in Germany, in Berlin, an immigrant. He plays an Austrian piece with all the Austrian idiom, and then you will be astounded that you will probably not find a better pianist in terms of getting the groove of the most American piece you can even think, the Rhapsody in Blue. I've done Rhapsody with several really wonderful pianists, but this always, I sometimes have to giggle while standing on the stage because of what he does and the freedom that he has.
He really makes it his own.
And it's a Russian guy. I mean, and it's the proof that, yeah, the world is one big thing, and one way or the other, we are all immigrants and we are just coming here together.
Well said, maestro. And there's one other piece on the program at the top of the show, which is totally delightful, on Hebrew themes by Sergei Prokofiev, which he wrote for some pals who were raising money for a music conservatory in Israel, and they were doing that in New York. And it's just a totally charming piece, and it's great to hear it. And in that, and in Rhapsody in Blue and elsewhere, you're going to hear magnificent clarinet playing by James Shields. It's a fabulous concert for him. He gets to do so much. So thank you for being here for the concert, also for this talk, which Joe Cantrell has been videotaping. Joe also did last night's, which is really interesting because Dibika, the playwright, was here. So you can check that out on YouTube or allclassical.org or orsymphony.org. And if you came in late, I want to make sure you know this is Chris Rogerson, who wrote the music for the play, which is coming after intermission, and you must stay for that. It is the most thought-provoking experience you're likely to have today and maybe for a long time. Carlos Kalmar.
Robert McBride.
Chris Rogerson.
Thank you.
And you. Thank you.
Thank you.